Our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook have the Chargers win total at 8.5 for 2024, and it just seems hard for me to believe that Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert are not going to have a winning season.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there, and thank you for making us your first listen. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, it's Fan Mail Friday, and we're going to kick things off with a tier voicemail about the Chargers. Getting 8.5 wins or more? I don't know. We'll see about that. I mean, there's a lot of issues on this Chargers roster. And what should we expect for this running game? Is it going to be markedly better? I think it definitely will. And what position groups in this year's draft do the Chargers have to double dip at?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's multiple you can make an argument for, but today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. And we're starting right here with a FanDuel over-under that our friend Atir, our boy Atir, our baby Atir, has a big problem with. Let's hear what he has for us.
Daniel, my bro, this is Atir. Okay, FanDuel just put out the latest wins total for the Chargers, 8.5. My question is, are they looking at the schedule? Do they know Jim Harbaugh is there? Do they know Jesse Minter is there? Go ahead, my baby. Defend you people. 8.5 wins will be more than happy to hear what you got to say. Because I don't think they're looking at the schedule, and I don't believe that they know Jim Harbaugh is there. Thank you, my baby. Love you. Can't wait to hear this.
I'll definitely talk with the people at FanDuel just to make sure they know that Jim Harbaugh is now in the building. David, 8.5, especially at this point in the offseason, so much still to happen. We haven't seen the draft or anything happened yet. So do you think it's crazy? Or would you go over? Would you go under on 8.5 if I made you have to make that decision right now?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just as the eternal optimist that I am, I scoff at 8.5 wins. I really don't like that number. But honestly, if you look at the way that this roster is currently constructed, I mean, it needs a lot of help. I mean, there's very few position groups that are solid than there are that need attention. I mean, it's receiver, corner, offensive line, defensive line, running back, safety, linebacker. All of those positions need upgrades in talent. So honestly, I think this is a little bit early. I don't like doing win totals at this moment in time just because there's so much that needs to happen before we get to where we're kicking the ball off and we're playing on Sundays, because we still have the draft. We still have the second wave of free agency. There's still some injuries that may take place that may alter how this entire season goes and how it unfolds for the Chargers. So right now, I still have it at 9. I still think 8.5 is a little bit low. I think at 9, with no other knowledge on how this season is going to unfold and where they're at, I still feel like they are going to have a winning season. I just think that 8.5 with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach is unrealistic.
I think that, assuming Justin Herbert's healthy all season, right?
Yes.
Last year we're talking about a team that won 5 games the whole entirety of last season, and they were very bad even before Justin Herbert got hurt, and wouldn't have probably went 4-0 in the last 4 games had he been on the team. So to me, it's as simple as this. Maybe it's just me drinking too much of the Jim Harbaugh Kool-Aid. I just don't see a team that has Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh getting any less than 9 wins. I don't see Jim Harbaugh, who's never finished a season at the NFL level under 500, going under 500, right? Because if it's under 8.5, that means you're going 8-9. So I'm not ready to say, hey, the Chargers are knocking off the Chiefs. They're going to sweep the Chiefs. They're winning the AFC West or anything like that at this point. But I do like the depth that this team is built. I'm assuming they're going to find a couple of starters in the draft. And when you have a great coach and a great quarterback, that almost always leads to winning seasons. And the Chargers haven't had that in a long time since Marty and Phillip Rivers were together. And in those seasons, the Chargers were never bad. So I'm going to say that they're going to get to 9 wins right now, I feel safe saying that. We'll get to our total, win totals and our final predictions on that much later on. But it's hard for me to believe they're going to have less than 9 wins in 2024, even in Jim Harbaugh's first season. But let's get to this next question we have here from Beyond Eons on Twitter, who's asking, last year our Chargers were ranked 25th in rush yards a game and 29th in time of possession. What do you see us being in these categories next season under Harbaugh and G-Row? And of course, G-Row is Greg Roman. What do you think?
Well, when you look at these two metrics for the Baltimore Ravens under Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator, it's hard to believe they're going to be anywhere but the top 10. This is what it looks like, and it's pretty ridiculous. In 2019, under Greg Roman, the Ravens were first in rushing yards per game at 204 per game, which was 50.5 yards more than the second place finisher, which is absolutely insane. And of course, time of possession, they were first. In 2020, first in yards per game, third in time of possession. 2021, third in rushing yards per game, third in time of possession. 2022 was what their worst year in this metric, third in rushing yards per game, and seventh in time of possession. Greg Roman knows how to run the ball. Like, he understands how to build these schemes to get successful runs consistently, and he's done it pretty much everywhere that he's been. And guess what? The head coach, Jim Harbaugh, does the same exact thing. So you're pairing these two powerhouse rushing elements together, you're going to get magic because that's what they produce. So I feel like, where should I expect them to be? I think it's going to be in the top 10. And I know that's crazy when you look at the production that the Chargers had last year, but I think just what Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh do together is they run the ball, and they're going to do it at a high level here with the Chargers.
Yeah, I think, it's hard because in Baltimore, obviously, you're talking about Lamar Jackson.
Of course.
And he had 2,000-yard seasons under Greg Roman. So that's obviously going to pad the stats of your rushing yards a little bit. And I think he had like over 800 in all those seasons that he was healthy for most of them. So that, I think, pads those a little bit. I think the thing that gives me some solace there is it was happening way before Lamar Jackson, because the worst a Greg Roman offense, with him being offensive coordinator, has ever been in a full season in the NFL is 8th. And it was his very first season in San Francisco. They were 8th in rushing yards per game, I should say. After that first season, San Francisco ranked 8th in his first year. That was the lowest of his career. That's the worst. After his first season, a team with Greg Roman as its offensive coordinator has never finished worse than 4th in the NFL. Never. We're talking about San Francisco. We're talking about Buffalo. We're talking about Baltimore. All 9 of those seasons after his first season, they've been 4th in rushing yards or better.
Proven track record.
That's crazy. I mean, that's a crazy thing. San Francisco ranked 20th in rushing yards per game before he got there in 2010, improved it to 8th the next season, and then improved it to a top 5 unit for the rest of his career anywhere he went, even in his first year in Buffalo and in his first year in Baltimore. So that is what you have to think kind of the strategy was in the Greg Roman signing, was just like, hey, this is a guy who's going to improve our running game, and we have Justin Herbert. I don't think they're going to run the ball nearly as much as he did in those places. I don't think he's ever had a quarterback anywhere near the passer that Justin Herbert is, that you're not going to just rely on the running game, right? I mean, Lamar Jackson, obviously, a 2-time MVP.
Yeah,
no
he's a
shots
transcendent
against him or anything like that. But the offense has to look different when you have someone like Justin Herbert manning that quarterback position. So I think if you're talking about time of possession, rushing yards per game, I don't know if I'm ready to say top 10, because obviously that's a huge gap that they have to cover, right? I mean, going from 25th to top 10 is a big, big leap.
Yeah.
Especially with the same offensive line right now that we're seeing, right? At the same time, I have a hard time believing it's going to be anything worse than 15th. And I think if you give Justin Herbert the 15th, the best rushing attack in the league, I think your offense is still going to be pretty damn good. So I think, to me, David, that's the minimum. That's the floor for this team. And that's something we haven't seen in the Jim Harbaugh era. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. But good.
Well, as you can say, if you want to improve the running game, then getting a guy like Greg Roman to come in and fix that is probably the best thing that you can do.
And we need to see some of these position groups really, really improve if that's going to happen, including the offensive line. And I think the tight ends are part of that as well. And we're going to get into that and so much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I do need to tell you guys about eBay Motors, because passion, drive, and patience are the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance with superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Let's continue this Fan Mail Friday here, David, with some good questions that people hit us up with at LockedOnLAC on Twitter, and people calling into the voicemail line like a tier at 323-524-7924. And the next one we have here is from Chris Saiz, who's asking, which position unit that struggled last year improves the most this year in your opinion? Where did you end up going for this one?
Well, it's kind of funny that this is the next question after the last topic that we just talked about, because for me, it's the running back position. I feel like the running back position is going to improve the most because they're going to have better runners, a better scheme, and that's going to provide better production from that running back position. I think that's going to be greatly improved under Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman.
It's a good place to start. I mean, to me, I've always been a firm believer of, like, it's better to have a really good blocking offensive line than it is to have a really good running back running behind a bad offensive line. So I think the easy place to start here would be offensive line. If you're talking about offensive line improving, you look no further than Greg Roman, who in 2012 had all 5 of his starting offensive linemen being some sort of Pro Bowler in 2012. Insane. All 5 of them, right? I'll switch it up a little bit, though, and I'm going to say the tight end position, even after losing Gerald Everett. I think the tight end position is going to be much better even before the draft because I think it's much more well-rounded, and I think the improvement that they're going to get in run blocking is going to be gigantic. I mean, I think between Hayden Hurst and Will Dissly and even Ben Mason, you're going to improve so much in the run blocking part of things that I think it's going to kind of mitigate what you're losing in Gerald Everett as a receiver, because Gerald Everett was an okay run blocker, and that was it. You were the worst tight end run blocking team in the NFL last season. And I think that not as much as the offensive line maybe, but so close to that, like such an underrated part of what a tight end does, I think that's big. And I think that if you're saying, hey, the run blocking is going to improve a ton, I also think that between Hayden Hurst and Will Dissly, I don't think that you're going to lose much as far as production in the receiving category, right? Because if you're looking, Gerald Everett had 51 catches and 411 yards last year. If you had me to put money on it right now, I would absolutely think that Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst combined pass that easily.
Yeah,
so, and you still have Donald Parham, right? So I think for those, I'm going with the tight end unit just because I know how much it's going to improve even without the draft as a run blocking unit. Whereas the offensive line, we'll see kind of the additions that they make there, right? And if they go, tackle in the first round, that could definitely improve the offensive line too. But I think the tight end unit is much more well-rounded and much more well-equipped to run block in Greg Roman's scheme. And I think that is, to me, why that's going to be the most improved position for the Chargers. Which leads us to the next question here from Edward Matias, who says, do you consider Donald Parham or Stone Smart a solid tight end 3? So I think really what this is asking is just which one of them is going to be tight end 3 for the Chargers in 2024. And it's a good question, David, because both of these guys obviously come from a different regime. It's a clean slate, as we heard from the new tight end coach. Who do you think is tight end 3 for the Chargers in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, looking at these two players, obviously we know what Donald Parham brings to the table. He is a very, very big, literally, receiving threat at 6'8" and pretty deceptively quick for a big man. Like he is, he did produce at a high level there, and he's an okay blocker. Stone Smart is unfortunately one of the worst blockers in all of the National Football League. And,
neither one of them are good.
And I say, they're not. Yeah, neither one of them are great. But Stone Smart is literally the 82nd out of 83rd run blocker, according to PFF, in the National Football League. And that's a minimum of 100 snaps with a 31.9.
I'm guessing Donald Parham probably isn't in the top half.
No, he's not. No, he's towards the bottom as well. Yeah. But Stone Smart is not a good enough receiver for the Chargers to overlook how bad he is as a run blocker. So I think just given that perspective, I think that Stone Smart is very much on the outside looking in with this new regime and their expectations on what they're looking for.
I would be surprised if Stone Smart makes the team in 2024.
That's where
I'll
I'm
just
at,
put
too.
it simply like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's Parham for sure right now. I think if they
Yeah.
draft a tight end, it could be whoever they draft. It's hard to know kind of what Ben Mason's role is going to be as a half fullback, half tight end. He has a clearer path to making the roster to me than Stone Smart does. Stone Smart was always kind of a developmental prospect as a guy who was a quarterback, then turned wide receiver, then turned tight end, right? Then he had, the play against the Packers last year. He's had some moments with the Chargers, but nothing ever that's been consistent.
Yeah.
And at the same time, being one of the worst run blockers in the league, which Donald Parham wasn't much better. I mean, Gerald Everett was easily the best run blocker of the group, and he graded out below average. So that's why part of the reason why I think it's going to be such an improved unit in 2024. Neither one of them are good run blockers. We at least have seen Donald Parham be better than what he was last year in the past, which is why it kind of sucked to see him regress a little bit in those regards in 2023. It's Donald Parham, and I think that's even a little bit flimsy if they decide to address it in the draft. I don't know. Obviously Brock Bowers changes things.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big drop off after that, so it'd be interesting to see, if someone else that they took later on, if they went that direction, could unseat Donald Parham. He has a fresh slate. They feel like they can maximize him in this new offense, but I don't think either one of Stone Smart or Donald Parham is really a great fit for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, neither one should feel safe, right?
I don't think so, but I do think that it's Donald Parham by a country mile between the two of those guys at this point. But let's get to Chris S. here, who's asking, if you could lock in one player and the Chargers have to draft him at his round value, who would it be? Example for me, it's Peyton Wilson in round 2. So, David, if you're looking at the draft and saying, hey, I need this player here and I'm willing to give up this round's pick to go get him, who would you go with?
Yeah, so I think in that situation, obviously the first round would be really easy. I'd love to take one of those receivers, but I'm not going to take the easy route here. I'm going to go offensive line, and I'm going to go with Cedric Van Pran, who is the center from Georgia. He's fantastic. He's a guy that's extremely durable. He played 14-plus games, 3 straight seasons. He only allowed 1 sack his freshman year and has not allowed a single sack the last 2 seasons. I think he's fantastic when he's pulling. He has very good recovery power and a strong anchor. I feel like if he's available in the 3rd or 4th round, which is where the beast Dane Brugler's draft guide says that he should be going.
You got to pick one though, right? In this, I mean,
if it's the 3rd, I'll take him in the 3rd round. I feel great.
You feel good about it?
I feel great about taking him in the 3rd round. I feel like that's good production, good value coming from a strong school, and I feel like he is a great player in the 3rd round to take. That's who I'd want if I had it my way.
Yeah, I would lock in wide receiver as well in round 1 if you could. I mean, really, Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah.
If you can come away with one of the top 3, I'll be happy, especially if you could still trade down and get someone like a Roma Dunze. I'd be good with it. At the same time, I don't think that's really what they're asking here, right? I think Chris wants to know, outside of round 1, if you can find that player. To me, I think I'll one-up you a little bit. I'd say Zach Frazier in the 2nd round.
Okay.
Dan
that is a one-up.
33rd ranked player, right? If he's there at 37 and I could lock that in right now, I'm doing it. I'm getting my center of the future. I give myself some more competition at guard because you let Bradley Bozeman potentially try to push either one of Zion Johnson or Jamari Sawyer for the starting guard spot. I think it makes your whole offensive line better, and it gives you a cheap center for the next 4 years. A player that we broke him down doesn't really have many weaknesses. If I was going defensive, going for bigger need, Mikey Samer's still a guy that both of us like, right? A guy that we've broken down before. He should go right around there as a nickel corner, the best nickel corner in this draft, someone that obviously knows Jesse Minter's defense and how important he was to Jesse Minter's defense last season. So if you could plug and play him, put him in the slot, you don't really have anyone. You have 2 guys right now on your roster that got benched playing in the slot last year. Asante Samuel Jr., who did it at the beginning of the season, and then Jasir Taylor, who ended up taking over for him. So we know Asante can play outside. We know Christian Fulton can play outside. You get Mikey Samuels still at 37. I'm 100% okay with it.
I'm
still a huge need.
Yes.
And you also take someone that you're going to love and fits great in this defense. So those are the 2 guys. Hey, if I could lock those in going into the draft and say, hey, I'm good with this no matter what happens, no matter who falls to this pick, I'm still okay with taking this guy. Those would be the guys that I would pick. But we still have much more to get into, including which position group we think requires a double dip in the upcoming draft, and also if the Chargers will take a playmaker in the top 3 rounds, because that room is really devoid of it in all areas, and we're going to get into that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. All right, David, well, we have more fan mail questions to get into, and thank you to the everydayers who are checking out today's show and making us your first listen. We appreciate you guys. And make sure, if you haven't already, to go subscribe and check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 national sports streaming channel, doing something that literally no other company, no other sports, anything could ever do, because the Locked On Podcast Network has local experts covering every sport every single day, and no one else can say that. But let's get to this one from Big Daddy E, who asks a good question here, David. And he's saying, which position group or groups do you think requires a double dip the most in this upcoming draft? Thanks, guys. Appreciate your work. I think, to me, David, it's going to be similar to what my answer was yesterday as far as the biggest draft needs. I think the biggest draft needs, corner and receiver, are the two position groups where I'd say, hey, if you take two guys there, I'd be happy with it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that. Mine's slightly different just because I feel like they could potentially add another wide receiver in free agency. So the two position groups I'm at is offensive line, which they're going to take a center. I would not be surprised if they take a tackle or a guard.
Yeah, if we're doing offensive line as a whole, but I don't see them taking two of the same position on the offensive line. Would be pretty hard for me to
believe. So in that respect, I'm going to go all defense here. I'm going to go defensive line, and I'm going to go corner. I think corner is the biggest one. They need a slot corner, and they need an outside corner. They have to get multiple corners in this draft, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think the argument for a wide receiver for me is this. You know how talented of a wide receiver draft that it is, right? So if you want to go ahead and take a Marvin Harrison Jr., right, or a Malik Neighbors with the 5th overall pick, and then you want to add a, Malachi Corley, a Luke McCaffrey, a Javon Baker, someone like that later on, and I would still be okay with it, because this is the thing. Either one of these groups, you're having the same conversation, because after next year, after this upcoming season, you have Darius Davis and Quentin Johnson as the lone two guys in that wide receiver room. That's not good.
No,
you know what I mean? We have no idea what Quentin Johnson's going to be this year.
Right.
I'm trying to get Justin Herbert as many young, talented weapons that are cheap around him as humanly possible. So if I can hit on two wide receivers in this draft class, now I'm getting plus value at a very important position to surround around my super expensive quarterback. And I think you could say the same thing about the cornerback position, just because Asante Samuel Jr. is going into his final season. That leaves just Dean Leonard and Jasir Taylor as the only guys in that room in 2025. So both of those positions, I think the Chargers could add multiple people to. I think they should at least consider it. I know they have a lot of needs, but both of those spots, it's like, hey, you need someone that can probably start for you this year and someone that could potentially develop into a bigger role in 2025 and moving forward, because both of those position groups not only need a lot of talent, you need young talent, you need cheap talent, and that's the best way to do it is in the draft. So I think that's the way I would attack it if I had to. Let's get to this one here from Colby Talbert, who's asking, the LA Chargers have a hole at playmaker. If they didn't get the big three or Bowers, the big three receivers or Brock Bowers, do you feel more comfortable taking a wide receiver or tight end in the day 2 picks? What do you think?
Yeah, after Brock Bowers, I think tight end can wait for me, because then I think there's a pretty big drop off in the talent from Brock Bowers and whoever is underneath him. So for me, it's receiver. You have to get a receiver in the first 3 rounds to me. It is imperative. It is an absolute must. We've talked about it ad nauseum. They have a big hole at talent at the wide receiver position. They have to add playmakers to that group, and it has to be addressed early in the draft. It just has to.
Yeah, it's not even a question to me. I'm fine with the Chargers skipping on all of the tight ends on day 2, because the thing is I don't think the need at tight end is as big, right? You have Hayden Hurst, you have Will Dissly. That's a solid room right now. It's not anything that's going to blow anyone away, but it serves the purpose that they're trying to get from that room, which is well-rounded tight ends who can do both things. And I mean, even Hayden Hurst has had a better season than Gerald Everett's ever had in his career, right? So it's not like if he can regain some of that form, it's not like you're losing much in that department. And you're getting, as their new tight end coach told you, one of 3 guys who can control the C gap. Wide receiver, you don't have anything, right? And this is one of the things that bothers me is 2 things. People who say, okay, well, look what the Kansas City Chiefs just did. They didn't have any wide receivers and they won the Super Bowl. That annoys me so much.
They're one of the best defenses in the NFL.
The second thing is thinking the Chargers should help Justin Herbert by giving him a running game, But then also just saying, okay, but then if we're giving you a running game, you don't have to have any good receivers either. That drives me insane. Are we trying to help Justin Herbert or not? If you're trying to help him by giving him a running game, why don't you help him by giving him more weapons, right? Because so far, you haven't done anything in that room outside of having two guys you already had in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, right? They haven't spent serious resources at that position since then, and those guys were in their prime with Phillip Rivers a few years ago. So to me, it's just crazy to think, okay, well, the Chargers are just going to have a good run game, and they're just going to hope that Justin Herbert can elevate that wide receiver room. Sure, I'm sure he's going to elevate that room.
Yeah.
Does that mean give him nothing? Absolutely not. And that narrative drives me insane. So I'm going wide receiver. The guys like Roman Wilson, Lad McConkey's really good too, right? Malachi Corley, another guy I brought up, super dangerous after the catch, and is the definition of a playmaker if you're just trying to add playmakers on offense. That's where I would go. But let's get to this note here from Lewis Bensman, who asks, how's Dan going? Is there anyone you want the other AFC West teams to draft bus candidates potentially? So how's Dan going? I think that's New Zealand for how's Dan doing. Hanging in there, Lewis. Hanging in there. New dad. I told David about literally a pretty crappy situation that happened literally right before the show happened. I won't get into too many details. This is a family show, but I'm learning, and I've had a crash course over the last couple of weeks with the ICU and, all the other things that come along with being a parent to a newborn. So thank you for asking. Is there anyone in the AFC West, anyone you want teams from the AFC West to draft? So for me, I hate disparaging players, right? And it's hard for me, especially being a little bit behind on, covering a lot of this draft and just having, 100 guys already scouted or anything like that. What I would love for it to happen, though, is for the Broncos or Raiders to reach for someone like a Bo Nix, like a Michael Penix, right? Someone that isn't really a first-round pick and waste, maybe not waste, but use a first-round pick on them when they really shouldn't, or mortgage your entire future, move up to the 4th or 5th pick to go get someone like J.J. McCarthy and totally kind of just derail what you have the next few seasons because you went up for the 4th best quarterback. I think that's the best way I could kind of see it happening as far as sabotaging other teams in the AFC West.
Absolutely, yeah. You want them to mortgage their entire future, get a quarterback that sucks, and then they get stuck in that hurt cycle of being really bad for a couple more years. That's
and trying to figure it out, right? Like you spend 2 seasons just trying to see if Michael Penix, right, or Bo Nix is the guy. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely, because then you're just a really bad team for a very long time. But I think for me, I don't like doing the disparaging players thing either, but I mean, probably getting a speed receiver, maybe like an Xavier Worthy, like the Raiders love speed. We know that. They might completely overdraft somebody
if
like
Al
that.
Davis was still alive, you could probably put Xavier Worthy just on the Raiders right now.
Exactly, right now. And it's just, we've seen very, very few examples of just straight speed guys having a lot of success at the NFL level. So I think that's probably what I would say, but I guess we'll see what happens in that situation.
Yeah, and me and you have talked about it before. With someone like Xavier Worthy, anytime you get in the low 4.2s, I kind of just assume you're not going to be a good NFL receiver. And he was so productive that I should probably wait and see with him a little bit. And I mean, I would love to have that kind of speed, obviously, and a well-rounded receiver, but it just seems hard for me to believe. But we do have a little time, so let's get into this last voicemail we have from Garrett here.
This is Garrett from Kansas. Hey, I love your guys' content. I was wondering your guys' thoughts on if the new coaching staff will try to utilize Justin Herbert's legs more. Thanks a lot. Bolt up.
All right, Dave, we've got to be quick here, but what do you think with that?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's one of the most underutilized assets to Justin Herbert's game. With Greg Roman, I think that's going to be a part of the game plan, especially in the red zone.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's such a huge, obvious risk of him getting hurt. And I think the nice thing is in the last year, even last year when he missed 4.5 games, he never got hurt by running the football, right? It was one time in the pocket, kind of just hitting his hand on a helmet, and the other time was after an interception, getting his finger stuck in Max Crosby's face mask. So it was kind of freak things last year. Even the fractured rib cartilage was just him standing in, taking a big hit, and making a throw. I think it'll be better than it's been for him ever. I mean, I think he has a pretty low bar, like 302 is the most yards he's ever had in a season, rushing yards wise. And I think using his legs also is, a much more heavy play action team. So I think just getting him on the move, maximizing his athleticism is something that'll happen. I don't think he's ever going to be Josh Allen. I don't think he's ever going to be Lamar Jackson as far as how much he's running the football, but I think there's a lot there there's a lot of gray area in between those things where I think he could find some real success, because I think every time we've seen him, he always looks like more of an athlete, and he's always much bigger than we give him credit for. So I love the question. I do think we will see his legs used more in this new offense, but that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here on Monday, because we are getting into Mock Draft Monday, a full 4-round mock draft with potentially a trade in the first round. So we're going to be getting into that, potentially the Chargers trading back and what else they could do in the first 4 rounds of the draft. To make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as following us on all of our social media. And thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC on Twitter, or called on the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. But you can also find the show every day on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page, as well as our personal Twitter accounts at Dan Talk Sports and Dro Talk SD for David. So make sure you guys are back here for Mock Draft Monday, a full 4-round mock. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.